let's get to it. So now, we're going to take a look at taxes, tyranny, and tenacity. So in your research that you were doing for that lovely little activity last night, you might have seen that there was a lot of rebellion, a lot of violence as well against the Stamp Act. Now, before we go any further, do the colonists have a very good reason to be upset? Yes. All right. Now, the people that are being targeted by their resistance, their rebellion, and their violence, do they also have a reason to be upset? Yes. All right. So tell me, if you have an idea that you want to get out there, what's the best way to do it? What? Yell it to everyone. That's one good way. You got to get people's attention, right? You said get media attention. Get violence. Okay. So here's the drawback, right? Because when you want to get your ideas out there, just yelling sometimes isn't enough. Getting violence certainly gets attention. That is something that can maybe give credibility to your cause, but what else can violence and rebellion, riots, do to your cause? Weaken them, disprove them, alienate people from them. So don't make the inaccurate assumption that all of the revolutionaries during this time period, or that everybody in the American colonies were revolutionaries. Not everybody agreed with this stuff. Some of them were frankly scared by it. I mean, if we look at our own situation today, there are statements that need to be made, but sometimes they're made through the wrong ways and will end up backfiring. All right, Black Lives Matter, hopefully you're all familiar with. Do they have a statement that needs to be made? Yes. All right, are there violent, trigger-happy cops out there? Are there also a lot more cops out there that are very responsible and doing their duty to protect people in our cities? Yes. Okay, are they often provoked by these massive crowds of demonstrators that want to hurt those police officers too? What's the parallel then? What's the parallel to things like the Boston Massacre?
Parallel is that law enforcement, or back in the day, be the British garrison, was being assumed to be violent towards the colonists. Like,
were they sometimes?
Sometimes, yeah, but not all of them.
Okay.
Like good. Modern day police officers, the majority are good and they don't do anything unnecessarily violent. And same with the British people, it's a small minority of that.
All right. Good. And does that mean, though, that Black Lives Matter is wrong because the way that they're doing things? Maybe not. I think they're right. At the same time, the cops are right, too. So that's the sad and kind of scary thing that we see happening here in the colonies right now, too, is that both sides, honestly, have their reason to be upset. The question is, who's going to get this done? Well, certainly there's a lot of protests over the Stamp Act. And there's going to be a group of people that are going to get angry and take to the streets. So you read about Thomas Hutchinson. Who was Thomas Hutchinson? He was the governor of Massachusetts. He's the guy responsible for taking care of the king's duties in the colony. And what will they do, these Sons of Liberty, what will they do to his home? Destroy it. I mean, they're going to go in and they're going to take his symbols of wealth, like furniture, documentation, you name it, throw it out the window and make a big bonfire. They'll take the portraits and paintings in his home and cut them to pieces, set them on fire, and then piss on the ashes. All right, so they'll have a good time rioting. They'll threaten to kill the guards that want to defend the home as Hutchinson ran away. And what else will they do? They can't kill Hutchinson, but what will they do to send a very strong message? Okay, the what? The dummy, the effigy. They're going to make effigies of Governor Hutchinson, make effigies of tax collectors and various Stamp Act collectors, and hang them from trees or from poles, often setting them on fire. Could this be scary to the people who are just doing their duty? Bless you. Could it be? I mean, I'd be freaking out if I was Hutchinson, and yet he will remain. He'll stay there and try and deal with the situation. So even John Adams, you know about John Adams. What was he doing at this point in Boston? He was a lawyer, okay, later he will defend some redcoats. John Adams, until violence really starts to break out and is seen as a point of no return, John Adams really was more of a loyalist. At this point he was a lawyer working for the government, for the king, and so he saw both sides of the story, and that's why I love his story during this time, because he looks at this stuff going on, and he was repulsed by the violence and repulsed by the illegal activities of these Sons of Liberty. By the way, who's one of those Sons of Liberty? His own cousin Sam Adams, living in Boston, repulsed by their illegal activity, but at the same time, let's see what this quote tells us. He says, "The people have become more attentive to their liberties and more determined to defend them. Our presses have groaned, our pulpits have thundered, our legislatures have resolved, Our towns have voted. The crown officers everywhere have trembled. What's he saying? He disagrees with their methods, but what does he agree with? They want to get their point across. Anything to add? All right, they're trying to get their message out there. He agrees with the message, not with the methods. And so that's going to be something that will be both effective and repulsive at times to certain people. So here we see, was their rebellion that we saw there, was it effective to the repeal of the Stamp Act? Did it bring about the repeal? Yeah, almost immediately. Parliament was like, whoa, that didn't go very well. I guess we should definitely repeal that so they don't keep getting mad. And here we see a political cartoon from the time period. And tell me, political cartoon, primary or secondary? All right, good. Political cartoons are always primary sources because they're from the time period. So who are these representatives? People represented in this cartoon? Who are these people? Yes, so the lawmakers, the judges, and this guy was the Minister of the Exchequer, who was the guy responsible for making the bill, birthing the bill. George Grenville. So here's Grenville, and what's he doing with this tiny little coffin? He's burying his stillborn child. It didn't work out so well. The baby was born stillborn, and now he has to bury his Stamp Act. And so let's see how they feel about the colonists here. Well, the colonists, which figure here is representing them? Anyone know? The dog. Good. What does the dog represent in art or in political cartoons? Loyalty. A dog is representative of loyalty. Does this one look very loyal? Pissing on its masters? No! All right, so it's fun. And the colonists were saying, yeah, we just won that one. How many of you have ever had a debate with your authority figures or your parents and won? Huh? That doesn't happen very often, does it? Right? Okay, so you have a fight with your parents and win, and in that case, how you feeling? All right, feeling pretty good at that point. But the parents, are they all of a sudden going to be like, oh, Jacob just won that argument. I would hide in the corner and never say anything. Are they going to do that? I hope not. That wouldn't be very good parenting. Okay, so parents who lose arguments, what do they usually say afterward? You won that one, but who still has the authority? I do. The parents, you just wait. Okay. So that's essentially what Parliament's going to have to do here. They say, wow, that worked miserably. Let's repeal that Stamp Act. But what it will do is cause the colonists to say, wait a second. We just won one. Hey, score one for us. We're doing pretty good here. Causing a lot more loyalty here. Here we've got guys hanging out in Virginia, landowners hanging out in the House of Burgesses. They're saying, yo, we should start chatting more. Plus, we're neighbors. Why wouldn't we talk about these things? And then they're saying, hey, there's guys up in Massachusetts who also have similar ideas. We should start talking to those guys more frequently. So a lot more unity taking place, and some epic figures of history are going to appear as the result, such as Pocket Patrick Henry. Here is my Pocket Patrick Henry for you. Patrick Henry is a man worthy of being carried in my pocket. Yeah? A man worthy of being carried in my pocket. All right, so Pocket Patrick Henry, he is going to be a landowner in Virginia. He's a part of the House of Burgesses, and he's a famous figure of American history. Glorious man, because in his debates, in which they're going to produce the Virginia resolutions that they'll send to Parliament saying, you guys suck, and here's why, what he'll say is, look, we are Englishmen. We are entitled to the rights of Englishmen. And can Englishmen living in England be taxed without being directly represented? All right, come on, Collins. I got to hear a little more than that. No! All right, good. And so he's saying, we deserve those exact same rights. And have you given them to us? No! No! All right, another thing he said is, look, for the last 150 years, you know what we've been doing? We've been living on our own. We've been doing our own thing. We have always been self-governed here. And now what? You just want to take away those good things? You want to start putting new rules on us, Mom and Dad? Like a new curfew and take away my allowance? What do you think? Would you like that? No! No! And so he's also going to give us a glorious quote that as Americans you all should know, and therefore your heart Twitter page, Patrick Henry, when you hear the name. What's the quote? Liberty. All right, good. So that was almost enthusiastic enough to be somewhat American. Almost enthusiastic enough to be somewhat American, but he's the only voice I really heard. So I'm going to give you all a chance. Anytime I say it, I want to hear it with your passion and patriotism. Or when you see Patrick Henry, that's the sign that it's coming. Give me Liberty R! Give me that! That's pathetic! That's not American, you're my biggest class! Give me Liberty R! Give me that! Yes! Thank you! I can see it in your eyes! Yes! Woo! That's patriotism in those eyes. Alright, so Patrick Henry, beautiful. beautiful man in history, and he's going to give us the repeal of the Stamp Act, but also now Parliament is saying, all right, well, they won that one, but, all right, now, have you ever had your parents win that argument and then hit you with the big but, right? So they're like, all right, you win, but here's what's next, okay? So they said, yes, we will repeal the Stamp Act, colonist children, but we're going to give you the Declaratory Act, which declares what? What do they say? You win that round, but what? All right, Ben?
Like complete legal power.
Good! Taking it from your reading. Good job, sir. So, they said, yes, you win that round, but we maintain authority in the colonies in all cases whatsoever. Then repeat that back to me so I know you got it, because it's on your test. What is it? Oh, come on, I want to hear the but. That's fun. You win this round? But what? We maintain authority. We still have power in all cases whatsoever in the colonies. And the colonists are like, all right, whatever you say, Mom and Dad. But I want that one. All right, so now let's see how tensions are simmering over in the colonies. Here's a little video about the profits of the colonies and the problems that we're seeing.
May 9th, 1768. 7 generations after John Rolfe's first tobacco harvest, the British are a bigger piece of the action. A British customs official springs a surprise raid on the Liberty, a ship belonging to John Hancock, the richest man in Boston. But Hancock's crew has other ideas. They're carrying 100 casks of imported wine and don't want to pay duty. It's a radical act of rebellion against taxes imposed by a king 3,000 miles away. To the British, they're just common smugglers. This small skirmish changes everything. The British seize Hancock's ship, triggering riots that sweep through Boston.
We didn't want to pay taxes to a king and to a parliament where we didn't have a voice and we didn't have any representation. We have a natural resentment toward government, which was how we were born.
The king sends 4,000 redcoats to Boston to enforce his laws.
Boston was a city of commerce, culture, civilization, and revolution unfolding right before the eyes of the colonists and the eyes of the British.
October 1768. British soldiers clamped down on Boston, a port crucial to the British Empire, and a hub of global trade and commerce. Its dockyards are some of the busiest in the world, producing 200 ships a year from America's vast timber reserves. A third of all British shipping is built in the colonies. Timber fuels the global economy, much like oil does today. Across New England, marks identify the tallest, strongest trees selected by the Crown for British ships. England has lost most of its forests. It wants American wood. In Boston, there's one redcoat for every 4 citizens. It's a city under occupation. Paul Revere is a silversmith and one of Boston's prominent businessmen. An unlikely subversive.
They formed and marched with insolent parade. Drums beating, fifes playing, and colors flying. Each soldier having received 16 rounds of powder and ball.
He is an upper middle class figure, someone who has risen through his own efforts, his own talent, He represents what we have created on our own with very little help from our cousins across the Atlantic.
But when revolution comes to North America, Revere will be at the center of it. Boston and the 13 colonies are an economic powerhouse critical to Britain. Nearly 40% of everything exported from Britain makes its way to America. The fishing fleet ships thousands of tons of salted cod to the Caribbean. Returns with sugar and molasses, raw material for rum. Taxed by the British after every exchange. In Africa, rum is the currency used to purchase the most profitable cargo of all. African slaves. Between 1700 and 1800, more than 250,000 Africans are brought to the American colonies. More slaves than all those who came of their own free will. Most wind up on large plantations in the South, but they're also critical to the economy of the North. 10% of Boston's population is black. Boston is a melting pot. Tension is building.
No one likes invaders in their homes. To have people here, foreigners on your soil, is a great incentive for people to fight.
All right, so you heard she was saying there's a lot of incentive to fight at this point, including some of the following. What did the colonies have that made the Brits want to maintain their authority over them, or their hegemony over them? What you think? Yep.
Resources.
Like what?
Tobacco.
Yeah, all right, good. And then in Massachusetts, you heard about the big trees that the king wants for his ships. It takes something like 2,000 trees to make some of the king's ships because their ships are so massive. So he wants those trees, definitely. All right, so a problem that he's having with doing that, though, is going to lead to this next question. What problem is the king and parliament having with many of these colonists who are told you can only trade with us? What are they doing? They're smuggling. And who was the second wealthiest man in the colonies who had that money in smuggling? John Hancock. All right, so what was the event then? What happened? We had a customs official. Customs officials are government agents that are supposed to enforce the king's will on exports, imports and exports. Duties might have come up in your reading. Duties means taxes on imports and exports, and the customs official is the guy that collects that money. Now, John Hancock's got a bunch of illegal goods, a bunch of contraband. It's Spanish wine, and he refuses to pay any taxes on it. He could go to jail for what he's just done. So as this customs official goes into his ship, what are they going to do to him? Lock him in and then not let anybody know about it. All right, so when the king does eventually find out, what's he going to do? Get mad and saucy in his fancy pants and start sending more troops to Boston, right? Tell me about the numbers of Bostonians versus soldiers, redcoats in Boston at this time. 4-1. All right, there's a lot of soldiers at this time. And who are some of the people that are getting really angsty about it? People who are smuggling, like John Adams, and have money. Businessmen like Paul Revere. All right, so Paul Revere, you might have done the reading so far on him. Paul Revere, what do you have to do in the midst of the Stamp Act when he was on the verge of bankruptcy? Part-time dentist, all right? And I don't know that he was real skilled at it. Personally, I fear dentists. Anyone else? Does anyone have dental parents in here? All right, I'm afraid of dentists, honestly. I would not go to a part-time dentist, especially. He was apparently not very good. He'd be like, oh, it's rotten enough, and then yank it out so he could get paid, okay? So, Paul Revere is resorting to dentistry to try and save his career here. He, like many others, justifiably very angry with the situation they see brewing in their home city that is now occupied by what is seen as a foreign power. And so now, what Parliament has to do amidst all of this, though, all this growing tension, do they still have bills to pay? Does Parliament still have bills to pay? Yes, they do. And so Charles Townshend is going to take over for Grenville when Grenville is fired after the Stamp Act, and he decides to bring in the Townshend Act. So one of the big problems that he's dealing with is how to increase revenue and cut costs for the government, right? So increasing revenue, more taxes that we're not going to take the time to go into a bunch. But another one is cutting costs. We've got a bunch of soldiers in Britain that have nothing to do, and we have soldiers over in the colonies that have, well, they're going to soon have things to do, but they cost a lot of money. So what should we do with all these soldiers? Send them to the colonies. He's going to send 4,000 more as a starting point, and then send even more over to New York. And so the colony of New York is going to be made responsible for a lot more soldiers, along with Boston as well. And the Quartering Act is made so that now individual citizens have to pay for those soldiers, for their food, their basic necessities, you name it. And is that something you're going to like, colonists?
No!
No, it's definitely not. Plus, he's going to have the audacity to temporarily suspend all colonial assembly. What? Now hold on, for the last 150 years, what have we been doing? What have we been doing? Self-governing in our assemblies like the House of Burgesses. Pocket Patrick Henry sure enjoyed going to those assemblies, and now are they allowed to do it?
No.
Okay, why not? What's the British government's idea here? It's only temporary, mind you, but what's their mentality? You ever been in one of those classes where all the naughty boys sit in one corner in the back of the room and they're naughty? What has to happen? I'm sorry, the iron-fisted dictator has to bring down the fist, right? What has to happen with those naughty boys? Separate them or crush them. All right, so crush one of them to make an example, and then separate the rest so they can't talk. That's essentially what the government's doing here, maybe justifiably. Well, Sam Adams didn't see it that way, thankfully, because Sam Adams is going to make a lot of noise about this with his friends in the Sons of Liberty. Now, Samuel Adams, by the way, he's the cousin to John, we established, but what did he do for a living in Boston? He was a brewer. So, because he was so good at brewing beer, that's why we have Sam Adams today, right? False. He was actually really bad at brewing beer. He nearly went bankrupt because no one wanted to drink his beer. It was so awful. So instead of charging them for beer, he would offer it for free. And then what would he do when they came into his pub? He nearly went bankrupt with the brewery, right? So now, let's have friends come into the pub. I'll give it to you for free, but then what's he going to do while they're there? Talk politics, all right? He's going to talk politics with these guys. That's not making any money, but it's going to make a name for him, all right? So he gives us great quotes. It does not require a majority to prevail, but rather an irate, tireless minority, keen to set brush fires in people's minds. Isn't that a beautiful quote? What does it mean? If you want to start a revolution, why is this quote perfect? Yeah, a small group of people with some fiery rhetoric, willing to maybe get in a scuffle with the authority figures once in a while to make some noise and get the media attention. He also gives us a great quote when he says, "Mankind are governed more by their feelings than by reason. Would it have been reasonable to go and burn the house of the governor?" I mean, if I disagree with Governor Bullock today, is it a good idea for me to go to Helena, get some of my cronies together, this side of the room, right, ladies, and we go burn his house down, piss on the ashes, and then threaten to kill him? Was that reasonable?
Yeah.
No, it's not, okay? But if you can galvanize their emotions to get to that point, then it'll work. One way to do that, make a fool of anyone that stands in your way. All right, but don't make the assumption that tarring and feathering, I mean, we kind of popularize it as, it's funny, because they look silly, they look like a chicken. Isn't that funny? But it's incredibly painful. How many of you have ever been burned by boiling water? Anybody? Okay, so tar starts to get to a bubbly pitch that is used for rope making. So rope makers at this time, they've got tar all over Boston to get the ropes nice and smooth with tar. They also have clubs to beat these ropes and knives to cut. All of that will come in handy here as time goes on. But they'll get this tar nice and hot at 300 degrees Fahrenheit, minimum. Usually 350 is the good temperature to keep it going. And then pour that on a person's skin, and they're getting third-degree burns all over their body. Not only will it kill the skin and damage the muscle tissue permanently, but in the event that they don't clear all of that off very quickly, you can die. Because if your pores are clogged with tar that dries, then you die, because your skin can't breathe. All right, so let's just get a feel for what that would have felt like. Here's a little clip from the movie John Adams. All right, anyone seen this Anyone seen the show? Great show. 8th grade. Did you watch the whole thing? All right, not the whole thing. Just the beginning. You saw this? All right. Did you see? I mean, did he edit it at all? Because
No, yeah, he didn't let us watch that.
good. All right. Well, he should have been more careful. If
We
only
had
he
a
knew
song.
my illegal
No, we
tricks.
had
All
a
right.
song.
So here's Sam. Here's John. Remember, John, is he really on the side of the revolution right now? Not yet. All right, he'll be pushed to it. Sam's trying to get him in that boat. Here you go.
So what is it Mr. Hancock requires of me?
We'd like your advice.
If he is in need of legal advice, I will speak to him. And if this is yet again an exercise to rid me of his right side...
business, John. Doc, the other beaver. Just in. Their holds full of tea. All British ships. The King demanded their cargo be unloaded. Cargo which we, the citizens of Boston, must pay a new tax.
Subject to arrest. You will not launch this cargo, gentlemen.
This is legitimate cargo. Tea from the East India Company that you are bound by law to unload.
What's legitimate about it, friend? No other tea is allowed in Boston Harbor. Either we drink the King's foul brew or nothing at all.
And who may you be, sir?
John Hancock, ship owner.
Not John Hancock, smuggler.
What's your word, sir? I'm an honest man being strangled by monopoly.
Shame on you, sir!
Shame on you! Shame on you! Shame on you! Teach him a lesson, double bastard! A brutal and illegal act to enforce a political principle, Sam! Answer me that, can you?
Different when we see it through the victim's perspective there, right? I mean, I feel bad for the government official because what was he doing there that day? Just doing his duty, right? Just doing his job. And yet, what did it take to turn that into a violent episode that certainly is going to cost this guy's life, I mean, his livelihood? Mob mentality, what did it take to get that mob going? One voice, right? The minority of one voice saying, shame on you, and then it turns into that. And that's the kind of thing that's happening in Boston at this point. Not as much in other colonies yet, but certainly happening in Boston, which is seen as the epicenter of this revolutionary movement. Other scary events in Boston, they're drawing some very vivid lines between who supports the rebellion and who does not. So the Loyalists, they're going to be referred to by what term? Anyone? Tories, good. So the Tories are Loyalists. Anyone know the term for the revolutionary enthusiasts? The Whigs, good. So the Whigs versus the Tories is what term is being thrown around at this point. And Tories are increasingly becoming the minority in the city because they realize if they're an outspoken Tory, they could get tarred and feathered, and nobody wants that. All right. Also, though, they'll become the targets of mob violence and vice versa. All right. But some of the biggest stories of the time have to deal with Tories being attacked. So what will happen is the Whigs will go door to door to Tory homes, and what will they paint on their door to indicate that they're a Tory and they're not one of us? A T. They'll take white paint and paint a T across their door or across their business windows or the business doors, you name it. They'll say, these are Tories, we are not. And the message being what? To the Whigs and other supporters. Should you associate with those Tories? Should you go to their businesses? What does that sound like? Boycott, yeah. Anyone picking up on any allusions to the future? Star of David, the term Jew. Okay, in what? Crystal knock, exactly. Now, I'm not trying to make the association that our founding fathers were Nazis or racists. Not the case, okay? But what I'm trying to get you to realize is there a lot of power to words and symbols? Is there? Simply painting a T on the door was enough to convince many of these Whigs to boycott one of these businesses. And one of those businesses was owned by Ebenezer Richardson. Ebenezer Richardson was a Tory, and he was enthusiastic about that. He had business ties back to England, wanted to maintain that relationship. Well, the Sons of Liberty came around and painted a T on his door of his business, starting a boycott. He saw this happening and didn't like it. He went out and confronted those Sons of Liberty, who promptly gathered a gang of other followers and started to accost Ebenezer and assault his business, throwing rocks through the windows. So Ebenezer ran to his home to try and defend himself, and as he was running, a huge crowd of Sons of Liberty, hundreds of them, chasing him down the street, threatening to kill him, to break down his door, to burn his home to the ground. So when he goes into his home, his wife and his children are in there too, and he goes and he gets his gun. And then the Sons of Liberty start throwing rocks through his windows and threatening to kill them. So what he does is he takes his single-shot musket and just randomly fires out the window. But who's he hit? 11-year-old kid. All right, so he shoots Christopher Sider, who was just there, gets shot in the chest, and he promptly dies. All right, now this is obviously a huge controversy. Both sides have reason to be pissed here. What the government will do is they recognize that Ebenezer would not get a very fair trial in Massachusetts, so what will they do with him? They'll take him back to England, which, by the way, is that lawful? Is that how we do things? If you commit a crime, where are you supposed to be tried? Where you commit the crime, right? In the area that you commit the crime. And so Ebenezer will get taken away, whisked away to England, where he will not be found guilty and put to death. None of that. Instead, Christopher Sider is going to end up becoming a martyr for the cause. And the Sons of Liberty have good reason to do it, but it's also a little bit shady here. How they're going to use his death as a martyrdom and a symbol of trying to spread their political message. So you might have read about it at this point. They're going to have a funeral cortege, right? A parade, basically, for this kid, where they put his body into a small casket. And Paul Revere designed a sign to go on his casket that everyone would be able to read from the street. And what did it say? In the grass lurks the serpent, and even innocence itself is not safe. So what's the message? What's the message? Who's the serpent in the grass lurking? The British and their cronies, the Loyalists. And so they're carrying this, thousands of people showed up for this thing, carrying this boy through the streets, and none other than Thomas Hutchinson stepped out from his mansion to try and join the cortege as a fellow mourner and take the body to the funeral, or to the graveyard. Now, what do you think the Sons of Liberty response was to that? And then, they actually pushed him back into his home and said, "This is your fault. You stay out of it." All right, so it's getting ugly, quite frankly. And there are not just Sons of Liberty who are spreading a political message, but there were what are called Liberty Boys. Liberty Boys were the younger crowd, like 17 and under, who would form gangs with each other, and they had plenty of opportunity to get in fights here, because what did they carry as rope makers? What did they carry with them all the time? Clubs and knives. And they thought it'd be fun to, wander past the garrison and there's a soldier and, yeah! Woo! Oh, come and get me, pig! Come and get me! All right, so taunting the soldiers. What do you think? Good idea? Okay, 16, 17-year-old boys, would it be a good idea to go to the armory down here on Broadwater and, go up to soldiers who have M16s and be like, ha! Woo! What are you going to do now? Huh?